On today's show, we give you more recommendations about what you should be reading based on what we've been reading. Okay, so we read a lot of comics in our own time. We don't always get to talk about them on the show, apart from in this segment where we let you know the books we've been reading on the side.
Yeah.
Do you want to take it away? What have you been reading?
I will take it away. So the first thing I've been reading, because I've been catching up on some classic Marvel events, after...
You say classic.
Well, the big ones, after reading Avengers vs. X-Men, I'd read Civil War. I knew there was some in the middle I've missed, so I started reading them. And the first one I read was Brian Bendis' Siege. Mm-hmm. Siege? I don't know why I pronounced that so weirdly.
Siege.
Which is basically the story about Norman Osborn and his Avengers, who are evil, and his attempt to siege Asgard. Why am I struggling to say that word? Siege. To take Asgard. It's a really good book. This
is kind of the main thread line, right?
Yes,
they will have had numerous other
times.
times.
There are many ones. There's like Wolverine the Inhumans and smaller Avengers ones.
So can you get the story from just that?
Yeah, you get pretty much everything from here. Right at the start, they established that Tony Stark's been gone for a while, as is Captain America. Norman Osborn's, along with the help of Loki, is framing Asgardians for crimes and saying that Earth basically needs to take Asgard, which is no longer in its own world, and it's been dragged over Oklahoma, I think it is. That bit isn't explained, how it ended up there, but you don't really ask, you just kind of accept. And it's a really good story, great artwork throughout. You get these nice little transmissions in between certain characters. You get to see a character death in here. I won't go into who it is, but it's very violent. As you can see, it's for a Marvel mainstream title, it's pretty gory. And it's just a really great read. And the moment in which Captain America returns on the scene, which is inevitable because he's on the cover, is a thing of beauty. I won't spoil it, but it is a really beautiful book, really well written. You get a lot of the villains that you like to see, a lot of the heroes fighting each other, and a really satisfying end. Not quite as good as Avengers vs. X-Men, a little bit better than Civil War.
I remember reading bits of it. I wasn't too fussed. I really don't like the Sentry, so...
Yeah, I'm not fussed on him. Him and Ares, and the God of War, yeah.
Cool. So we got a comment on a video recommending that we read the Immortal Iron Fist. I bought it and read it by Fraction, Brubaker, and Aja. Fraction, Brubaker, of course, the team behind Hawkeye. And this looks...
No, Fraction Aja.
Fraction Aja, sorry. And this looks a lot like Hawkeye. Not quite as... There's not much playing. There's not, it feels more traditional than Hawkeye does. Yep. And it feels very much like the book that they did before Hawkeye as opposed to the book that they did as well as it. Like,
okay, yeah.
Do you know what I mean? It just feels like they're finding their feet, getting their groove down. Having said that, very enjoyable story. With a great promise of other stories to come. The artwork looks great. There's loads of interesting little tidbits that Aja throws in, like he does, which are very nice. The dialogue is great. Fraction writes the interactions between different characters really, really well. The interactions between, what's his name? Iron Fist's name?
Danny? I cannot give you a second name. Not off the top of my head.
Well, him and Luke Cage, the interactions between them are really cool. And some kind of, you get moments of downtime, which is really nice. Yeah. So it's a very fun read. I read it very quickly. It was very enjoyable, very easy to read. Just good comics, like just a good comic book story. And definitely the best Iron Fist story I've ever read, because I haven't really read. I've only,
haven't read any Iron Fist, so...
Well, one of our arguments was that he's always kind of a side character, and he doesn't usually have his main story, and this is his main story, and he does stand up in it, and he is good in it, so So definitely check that out.
Fantastic. I definitely intend to. Much like the last time we did this, I talked about my DC Comics year by year. Not actually a comic book, more of a history, if you will. I have another one here, and it's ComicCon 40 Years of Artists, Writers, Fans, and Friends. It is basically the 40-year history of the San Diego Comic-Con, which is obviously the most well-known one. And throughout this book, you get to see it go from its humble beginnings in a small hotel lobby all the way up to its now mass multimedia event where film industries, the gaming industry, and just about the comic book industry now attend. It's a really fascinating read. It's so good to see how this small industry of comic books, something that was a kid's medium, has evolved, and it's a really interesting way of seeing it because the DC Comics one, you get to see how the comic book has evolved, whereas in this book you get to see how the fan base has evolved and the appreciation for it as more of an art form than an entertainment form. It's just definitely something I would recommend picking up, even if, because it's a beautiful coffee table book.
Yeah.
That is for damn sure. And it's really great seeing all these old creators like Jack Kirby in the front and all of his old like sketches that he did for the posters and that he did for people there, all the way up until to the modern day posters that you get done by like Darwin Cook and interviews with Jim Lee and like how they then branched out to things like WonderCon and stuff like that. It's a really fascinating read into what is ever evolving industry. Definitely worth picking up.
Cool.
I would say.
So the book that I read is Mouse by Art Spiegelman, which many people consider to be one of the, if not the best graphic novel comics kind of ever written. I mean, I liked it. I did like it. It's very, very, very good. And everyone who is into comics should read this book.
Okay. I have not read it.
No. It's
I love the way you say that. Oliver. No, obviously you haven't.
It's about the Holocaust.
Yep.
And it uses these mice, kind of anthropomorphized mice characters. And there's a lot of talking, and it's basically the kind of this granddad retelling his story to his son. Mm-hmm. This is the complete. There's 2 volumes. This is the complete edition, and you should definitely. It's important, I think, that it's more than it being a spectacularly brilliant comic. It's just important that you read this. I think there's a lot of sort of snobbery by people who are into superhero comics towards these type of comics, and I also think that exists the other way around. People who are into more kind of biographical, literary comics, if you like, snobbery towards people who are into the tights and that kind of stuff. And that's silly, but it does exist. You find that people kind of stick to their realms, but this is one of those where you do really, really need to read. Read them both, and I think that's why Watchmen was so successful, because it's kind of the perfect blend of the superhero and the literary, really. You should really, if you're into comics and you've only read superheroes, you should read stuff like this. You should read stuff like this. Read stuff like the Guy Delisle, Jerusalem. Read Blankets by Craig Thompson. Blankets, by the way, one of my favorite comics of all time. Like, there's so much good stuff. There's a wealth of good stuff. And Art Spiegelman, really, why this is so popular, he started that. He said, he was the one, you're talking about the history and how people viewing it from an entertainment to art. Art Spiegelman was really the guy that went, no, comics can be so much more. And so, as a milestone, it's worth reading. And it is emotional in parts, and parts of it are tough because of the nature of the subject matter. So, definitely recommend.
And if you don't read comics, I imagine it's something that's actually quite a good way into that.
It's a good bridge as well. If superheroes frighten you and you don't read comics, then this
Superman!
is... Hey,
it happens.
Yeah, like...
If you're a criminal.
It's a good bridge because it's about serious things and it's about someone who knows what they're talking about, and it's important, I think.
So that's it for this week's show. If you want to follow us on Twitter, we are at Comic Book Show 1. You can go there for any and all updates about the show.
Yeah, and if you want a rundown and reviews of this week's books, casualrobot.com, don't forget to check that out.
Yep, and you can still donate to my Red Nose Day fund, where I'm going to let Dan make a fool out of me by shaving my head like Quentin Quire.
Everyone wants that. Thank you very much for watching, and we'll see you next week.
Siege? Mm-hmm. Siege? Siege. Siege. Siege.